Well, switching gears from our Roy garden, we're going to go to one that has a little bit cooler look to it. We're going to take a look at our silver garden. And one of the plants in here that has done extremely well this year is our Plectranthus. This is Plectranthus quicksilver, and it is a plant that you would use much as a coleus, just a bedding plant for the summer. And we have ours planted here on the east side of our Hollywood juniper. So this gets shade in the late afternoon to evening, which is very important for this plant. Now, if we had put this plant here last summer, it probably would not be doing as well. However, this summer, with all of our rain and a little bit cooler temperatures, it's done very well. And it's one silver plant that you could actually put in more of a shady situation. But you can tell here, we have got a very good plant for this garden for this summer. Now, some of the other plants that we have here, of course, we've looked at very recently, are California poppies. But as we look at our silver garden overall, we have had some problems. And this was probably not, weather-wise, the best year to have a silver garden. And you can recall that I was telling you about how the silver plants tend to like dry, desert-type conditions. Some of them are very good for xeriscapes, and right here is a good example of this. This is our silver brocade artemisia, and you can see here we've got just a little bit of it still living, but for the most part, this plant has not survived the summer. This is a low grower, close to the ground, and so keeping it dry and also the lower humidity is extremely important for this plant. Now, back in here, we actually have some plants that have done better, and if we come right over here, our Pois Castle artemisia is doing fine. You can see here that it's a taller one and it's up off the ground a little bit more, but our weather has not seemed to bother it. And this is one that I think for our area is a very good artemisia to put in because it likes it both when it's very hot, but it can also stand the humidity too. And it's one of the Oklahoma proven plants, and you can see why. Now, just looking here, we've found this to be kind of interesting. We've got two plants here together, and you can't really tell where our artemisia foliage stops and our California poppy foliage starts. And we thought that was kind of fun. They're not really related, however, their foliage is extremely similar. Now, as we're talking about foliage, we've got a plant here that I wanted to show you, and this is one of our Russian sage. And you know, Russian sage, I've got a little sprig of it here. It tends to get fairly tall and kind of start to flop out just a little bit, and it's got these deeply serrated leaves. Well, if we look at this cultivar of Russian sage, which is actually called Longin, you can see the difference. Here our leaves are not as deeply lobed. In fact, they don't have any lobes at all on them. Now, this plant tends to stay a little bit more upright in growth habit, and also without the lobes on the leaves, it's not going to have quite as lacy of a look to it. So this may be a good selection for your garden for a little bit different texture, but you'll still get that performance that you get with the Russian sage. Now, some of the other plants that we have in here that are doing fine, one of the plants that you're probably going to be seeing a lot as a bedding plant, the eucalyptus, seems to work very well. It's a nice way to add some silver to the garden, and again, mostly as just a summer bedding plant. Now, one of the shrubs that we planted in here, this is blue Arctic willow, and you can see here it's got kind of a bluish tint to the foliage. The leaves have a little bit of a waxy coating to them, and the way it gets the Arctic name is that it's hardy to zone 3. In fact, it's hardy from zone 3 to zone 6. So it may be a little too hot and humid here for this plant. However, so far it's doing very well. Now, this cultivar is Nana, so it only gets about 6 feet tall and 6 feet wide overall. So we're going to see how this one performs, but right now it looks really pretty in the garden. Now, our Silver King artemisia is another artemisia that is doing well. It's performed for us consistently no matter what the weather looks like. It has somewhat of a weedy look, and we probably should have put some of our other plants in front of it because it's masking them. Now, the final plant that I wanted to show you is very interesting. This is called the round leaf or beach vitex, and it's hardy to zone 3. And this is actually a plant that can be found growing in Hawaii. And so it's probably going to love a hot, humid summer. And It's a shrubby plant that acts very good as a ground cover. It will have kind of bluish flowers on it later in the season. And it only gets about 3 feet tall. So we're going to be watching this plant to see how it performs. Well, as we're looking at Vitex, I've got another Vitex that I want to show you. Well, as we're talking about the Vitex, I wanted to show you the shrub that most of us would probably think of. This is the Vitex tree. Sometimes it's called a chaste tree, and it's actually either a very, very large shrub or small tree. It grows to 15 to 20 feet tall, and you can actually use it either way. And if we go around here on the underside, I'll show you what I'm talking about. Now, right in here, you can see our branches here. Now you can actually limb this up so this area would all be open and it would be more like a small tree, or you can leave all of this growth in here and make it more like a shrub. The other thing that you can do is actually cut it down about 6 inches above the ground each year, and that will actually help contain it a little bit more. You could use it like you would a perennial, and it won't get quite as big as 15 to 20 feet tall. Now when you chop that off every year, it's not going to really affect the bloom that much because it blooms on new growth. So that won't hurt the bloom on your Vitex, and if you need to keep it in a smaller area, then I'd recommend chopping it off every year. Now the foliage on this is a very pretty, bright, well actually kind of a dark green on the top. It's got a little bit of silver to it, and then as we turn the leaf over, we have this beautiful gray look to it, and that contrast between the top and the bottom of the leaf is very striking. The other thing about this shrub is it has a really pretty bloom, and it blooms in the middle of the summer. Late June through July, we have these lovely 6-inch flowers that are kind of a violet blue color, and even though this one is almost done blooming, it blooms from the back to the top. You can see that we have buds here that are going to come out, so it blooms for quite a long time, and you can see as we look there are several blooms that will be coming out later. So we have this nice blue bloom right in time for 4th of July. Now the tree actually likes a large variety of soils. It's hardy to zone 6, and it can pretty much stand any type of soil. It would prefer to be well drained instead of in a boggy spot, and it is a wonderful addition. And so if you're looking for a very large shrub or a nice small tree, you might think about putting a Vitex in your own landscape.
We hope you've enjoyed this classic from the Oklahoma Gardening Vault. Remember, even though these tips and techniques are timeless, there's always something new to learn in the world of gardening. By subscribing to both Oklahoma Gardening and OK Gardening Classics, you'll have access to a wealth of gardening knowledge, both classic and contemporary.